Welcome everyone to What the Force. I'm Marie Claire.
And I'm Missy.
And we are your meta-mythical masters. And you are all our acolytes. And we are covering Star Wars The Acolyte, Episode 6. Teach and corrupt. Teach/corrupt. My goodness, we're back to the dual names.
I know. That seems quite deliberate, doesn't it? And it also really reinforces what we said about how clearly day-night was supposed to be one episode, I think. So,
Yes. And if you've never listened to What the Force before, this is a Star Wars podcast, but we talk about Star Wars a little bit differently. And especially for The Acolyte, we are covering it from a meta-mythic folklore fairy tale perspective. So you'll get something a little different on this podcast. Remember to like and subscribe to keep up with everything to do with the show. Show your support for the show by sharing it out there with the world. If you found something interesting, I give you full permission to clip little bits if you want to share them with people. And I just want to call out to my Patreon, who, of course, I have been doing bonus content for every episode, a little write-up on something that I found particularly interesting on the show. And Missy can tell you they're killer.
Oh, they're so good. You're just on fire lately. It's fantastic.
It's really good. And I think it adds to the show.
I do.
All right. So I did want to thank everybody for all of your questions. We're actually kind of time limited in the amount of time that we have to record tonight. It is very late in the middle of the night right now for both of us. So we're going to keep it fairly limited, but I will be getting back to everybody who I don't answer if we don't answer it on the podcast. So do pay attention to Twitter, as most of these did come from there. Did you want to do the first one?
Yeah, so there's just a couple we did want to cover because like Marie Claire said, we're going to cover most of these in the episode. But we wanted to just pull out a couple because we probably aren't going to cover them exactly. But the first one I want to mention just because Marie Claire last episode predicted that Chimera was going to take Osha to a cave of sorts. In order to underground, he needed to take her underground. So Jay McLuhan says, congrats on he will take her to a cave prediction. Can you elaborate on the meaning / symbolism of this? So excited to listen to your analysis.
Yeah, so Ymir himself is, of course, a Darksider. That means that he is somebody who is in a shadow archetype of some sort. We're still kind of discussing what that probably is. I really got the sense that because he kind of falls into the classic monster predator vibe, even though he is coming off as more charming, more caring, all of those things, I do actually think that's part of who he is as well. That he would, very monster-like take her to his cave. And there's a lot of meaning in Star Wars from a cave perspective and what they mean. It's a place of transformation. It's a place of coming into, the deep, dark, moist parts of yourself so that you basically melt into goo to be reformed. And that's why I was very excited about this idea.
It was pretty fun, though. It was a fun way to start the episode, to be like, and Marie Claire was right.
Yeah.
It was really fun. So the second one that we wanted to cover briefly, just because it's fun, was a Bookly 83 says, I think it's safe to assume he bridal carried her to his ship and then to his bed, right? And I just, I love you all. I love you, rats. You're the best.
Yeah. I mean, how else, right? It's Clearly. Not like he had the floaty thing that carried Han Solo and Carbonite handy. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. No.
He certainly handled her with care, I'm sure.
I'm sure he did. Yes. And then the question is, but then how did he get her across? Maybe it was low tide or something, because he has a whole thing about how you have to swim across or wait for low tide.
He flies.
That's right. He does fly. That's right. I forgot about that. So he flew her across.
It's very Superman, dark Superman-like.
Yes. I'm here for it. Anyway.
I mean, this all makes sense in my mind.
I know. Sure. We're just going to go with it. All right. Listen, I have not had a chance to dive into AO3 yet, but trust and believe I will be doing that. So
Ty Black, of course, who's been on the show many times, friend of ours, counted before the episode dropped. There was 25 fics. When I checked earlier on today, there was 32. So let's hope for an exponential increase.
Let's go, folks. Get moving. And I feel like that brings us to, before we get into the themes and everything, I think this is the question I wanted to ask you, Marie-Claire. Has this episode surpassed The Last Jedi as the horniest Star Wars?
Oh, I think it's on par with it, at least. Yeah. I think it has to have passed it because we explicitly see more intentionality behind Chimer's actions.
Mm-hmm. And also, we went from just pecs to fully naked. So I mean, I feel like that's
he's fully nude in the moment, So I don't think there's a question that this is now the horniest Star Wars. I said to my patrons, this was the horniest Star Wars in 30 minutes that we've gotten. So I think so, yeah.
It fills me with joy. Thank you, Leslie.
I did briefly want to talk about the Reylo parallels because it's all out there. Like of course, the rats are about the blue butterflies and rats, blue butterflies and rats in this whole thing. But
so funny.
This little Stan girl who's been, good friends of the show since we covered Willow, actually tweeted out this great tweet, which I captured because I love it so much. And I've talked about how Chimere is like the monster is on the inside and the human is on the outside. And Kylo is like the monster is on the outside and the human is on the inside. And I think that that's a really good way to parallel them and think about them. But she actually said, Oshamir is great because of the obvious parallels, the echoes, the rhymes to Reylo, but it's so distinctly its own thing. Chimere's seduction of Osha is not Kylo's broken begging of Rey. Osha's rage isn't Rey's loneliness, just love when story rhyming, not mimicking. And I absolutely love this so much because it's exactly, what we want to see. And, I think that there's some purposefulness in potentially having the story sort of bubble up this idea of opposites want to push together to find unity. Because that's so Star Wars. And the idea that there is a resolution that can be made there in finding the piece of yourself in the other person that you have long denied is beautiful. It is the basis of alchemical union, the Jungian concept, of course, that is based on alchemy, to do with the fact that in our lives and psychologically, we like to have the things that are opposite in ourselves actually find harmony inside ourselves, especially when we have long denied those aspects. So when we think about the dark side and we think about how in our society we shun those aspects, or we shun anger, we shun fear, we shun desire. When those things are said, no, it's okay to feel those. It is true. We do need to feel them. Clarissa Piccola Estes that would be a foundational thing in her work of the wild woman archetype.
Yes, and leaning into rage and feeling, emotions like grief and desire and embodied desire too. That's another thing too. The concept of
Liloba, the myth of Liloba is all about the feeling of of sexuality and
really
your body.
Inhabiting your body fully. Like that's a very important thing, which is funny because that's really the opposite of how the Jedi view it. The Jedi think that you need to be kind of above earthly things and kind of detached from their bodies, and that's a lot of their their philosophy. So it's very interesting how this is in opposition to that. And the other thing I want to mention, and I know we're going to go into this in more depth in the episode, but the other way in which this is different from Reylo, and at the same time, obviously there are still those parallels, is that regardless of whether there's any potential for redemption, which I think is very, very questionable personally, I think it doesn't look like it's pointing that way right now. It certainly could in the future, but I don't think that's where we're headed anytime soon. But regardless of whether there's any opportunity for that, what I don't think it is is a cautionary tale. I think that Kaimir and the role he plays is necessary for Osha. We talked about how all this time she's been a damsel, like just the whole time she's been a damsel, and to the point where we were getting frustrated and saying, when is she ever going to stop being a damsel? What on earth would it take to break this girl out of this? And as it turns out, what it takes is Kaimir pushing on all of her insecurities. He is, activating her desire. He is activating her rage. He's validating her grief. He is absolutely, there to push back. And every single time she gives one of her trite answers, he doesn't accept it and he pushes. And this is very important. So what I find fascinating about his role is independent of whether, he personally is a good guy or whatever, which he clearly is not at this point in this story. But independently of that, he is incredibly necessary to her growth, incredibly necessary. And that's huge because that ultimately is, enemies to lovers or opposites attract or whatever you call the trope. That is what it does at its best, is it takes those opposites and forces you to grow.
And I think that you bringing up that she's a damsel, we had some questions about this, kind of between the weeks as well, like really focusing on her being so much of a damsel. And I would say that Osha fundamentally is probably a victim of something.
Yes.
And we're about to find that out. And there's probably going to be some real world parallels to how she has potentially repressed these things or, force magic repressed what has happened to her in some ways, or she was, she lashed out in anger previously and she wasn't able to control herself and she has lost those memories through one means or another. But there's going to be some sort of parallel to that where you have built yourself a castle psychologically around yourself. And it's going to help to basically say, no. You need to own these things that you have done. You need to own these things that are part of you. You cannot deny them, because fundamentally being a damsel is about denial of the things and the world around you and not wanting to actually live an adult life and face those challenges. And she is in this denial where she's wearing like the bib of the Jedi.
Yeah. It's so true.
Right? She wants to stay in this childhood state of being told she's not good enough to be a Jedi. And yet she hasn't figured out what her path is, but she is still filled with power. And are you going to allow an institution to tell you what is right and wrong for you?
And she has to become comfortable with questioning authority, which is wild, right? Because as a child, she was very comfortable questioning authority and didn't hesitate.
Her mother's, right?
Exactly. So now as an adult, she hasn't been questioning authority. And it's only when Kaimir tears her away from that structure and forces her to confront. I mean, that's why I think, and the whole thing about the Cortosis helmet is so important. The idea of it as sensory deprivation is you have nothing. We've stripped everything away and the only thing left is you. And you have no option but to confront who you really are because everything else is gone.
That is fundamentally the ego death that we've been talking about for the past couple of episodes when Inanna descends into the underworld and is stripped of all her garments because you're stripped of everything that you think is you. She thinks she's not good enough to be a Jedi. She thinks she was a Jedi. She thinks all of these things, right? She thinks she's a Mechnik. Like all of these things are stripped away. And so it's just you, the Force, and the things you bring with you. Right?
Love it.
And so to become whole, and part of this is that you need to accept the darkness in yourself. And he says he accepted it, but I have questions.
I also have questions.
But you reach your lowest point, which is the catabasis, which is the lowest point of yourself inside of your unconscious. And you reform who you are to become whole again. That is what the hero's journey, the adventurer's journey, the mythical storytelling is all about. This is a lot for the first part of the episode.
I know, but it's important. Let's jump into, I think it's a good segue. Let's jump into the themes and mythic motifs.
Yeah. So the island itself is full of femme symbolism just because, it is. And it's important. All the water, the green, the little thala birds, I was calling them in my notes.
They're called skura.
Skura, yeah. And I think that they were supposed to be like anteaters mixed with ducks, which is adorable.
They're so cute.
They're so cute. I want them.
Yeah. I want bath toys. I want bath toys of the skura.
Thank you, Neil Scanlon, for doing an amazing job. But the femme symbolism and, to the fact that Leslie Headland has said in several interviews, shout out to Collider and Maggie Lovett that just came out with Leslie. It is not Acto. She said it. It's not Acto, not the island, but it's supposed to make us feel like Acto. It's supposed to be this experience because this is what she needs to see. She needs to reconnect with, green.
Yes.
Water, life, the cave, the moisture. This is something that Clarissa Piccola Estes talks about in the Wild Woman archetype, that we, when you need to reconnect with the feminine, you go to the moistest place you can possibly think of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's also the isolation. The isolation is a big part of that because, again, it's this concept of like, who are you independent of everything else? So it's very typical for, again, these sort of women who are trying to reconnect to their wild woman to go not just into the deepest, dankest place, but also to go there alone. They go there by themselves. And she's there. And granted, Kainai brought her there. But think of how often he leaves her by herself very frequently throughout the episode. So it's definitely tons and tons of femme symbolism, and we'll get into all the specifics throughout. And I want to go from that to talking a little bit about symbolism. And a lot of you will probably recognize this from, for instance, if you read Da Vinci Code, and legitimately, I hate Dan Brown, but also like, dang it, he's just a good touch point for a lot of these things. But the chalice and the blade. So essentially the chalice, which is the feminine principle, the sort of cup, if you will, and the blade, which of course is, any type of dagger, sword, etc., or other phallic object. So these are commonly used symbols throughout mythology and historic art, prehistoric art. We see them throughout history. And what they've indicated over time is the dominator principle or dominator model. And I know that, what is her name? I'm so sorry.
Bell Hooks.
So Bell Hooks talks about this as well. Yes, I'm so sorry. So Bell Hooks talks about this as well. And, but there's that model versus the partnership or care model. And again, these go by different names depending on which scholar you're reading. The version that I'm looking at is from the book The Chalice and the Blade by Rian Eisler. And this comes from that same period of time that we've talked about before, where roughly around the late 80s and early 90s, there was this just massive blossoming of feminist literature, particularly around, and scholarship, particularly around folklore. And it was almost this feminist reclamation of folklore studies to an extent. And honestly, that's when most of the books that we talk about, that's where then it all came from. So Women Who Roam with the Wolves and the In Search of the Swan Maiden and like a whole bunch of these other books, they all come from that time period. And Chalice and the Blade also comes from that time period. And they were all reading one another and they all reference one another. In fact, I was laughing when I was reading this one because Rian Eisler referenced Maria Gambutis.
Oh,
and I was like, oh!
She's who, of course, Joseph Campbell based a lot of his work on the goddesses on.
Exactly. So point being that they were all kind of, exploring these similar ideas and, trying to determine, what do these stories look like outside of patriarchy? What do they mean outside of a patriarchal context? And so what I really like about this is that it would be easy to just look at the chalice and blade symbolism that is very obvious across this entire episode and go like, oh, haha, they're playing with gender roles, which Leslie says that she did. So yes, they did. But there's more to it than that. This is exploring what are power dynamics outside of the Jedi concept, because the Jedi is a patriarchal organization. The Jedi Order is a patriarchal organization. And, we've already seen them use that masculine symbolism with them handing Osha the lightsaber when she was a child. We've seen that already used to represent the Jedi as a patriarchal organization. So we know that this is something they're already doing. But here in this episode, suddenly we have pools of water. We have obviously the cave, which we've already talked about. There's also a pool of water inside the cave.
Chimera the stranger in his flowing garbs that look kind of beautiful and gorgeous.
Yes. Well, he's behaving, his hair, his costume, everything, he's behaving more fun. But also he's like, I can't wait to point this out, but he's not handling the lightsaber in this episode. She is. He's handling a bowl. That's his
carrying and
prop.
Feeding and nurturing and
bowl.
Yeah.
So it's like, she's the blade, he's the chalice throughout this entire episode. It's fascinating. It's really, really interesting. So I'm really excited to go through all of that. The other thing that we see a lot in this episode, and this also comes from In Search of the Swan Maiden, is, we've talked a lot about Chimera. Is he the animal husband? Is he Bluebeard, which is the predator? What is he? And I think the truth is he's kind of all of the above. But in particular, I think in this episode, he heavily leans into being the incubus. And the incubus is a form of demon lover, which is the dark avatar of the heroine's sexual fantasies or her power fantasies. And power fantasies and sexual fantasies are often used interchangeably in story, particularly because in a patriarchal society, often women will fantasize of escape. And part of escape is escaping the expectations of society. And hence, the demon lover, the dream lover, is a monster as opposed to a human man. And so this is a role that he leans into very heavily throughout this. And I would point out she's been waking up suddenly, right, throughout the entire season. And she does it at the beginning of this episode, too. And now she's in his bed. She's in his bed. And she wakes up, and then he basically just tries to seduce her the entire time. So this is really, really important. And I'm going to briefly quote from In Search of the Swan Maiden, because I think this is important when we're trying to figure out what archetype he is at this point in his story. And that is, incubus lore transforms the animal groom tales just as it does the Swan Maiden tale. Not every suitor who appears to a woman in animal form is waiting to be released from an evil spell unwillingly suffered. These creatures are also emissaries from some infernal region. So he has effectively been called up from her subconscious, right? He represents all of her repressed desires and fantasies. And the easiest way to express that on screen is sexually or sensually, but effectively that's what it is her dream of being a Jedi. That was her dream, and it's been repressed all this time. And so now that power fantasy is coming back. So yeah.
And I also think that there's a bit of the care and nurturing aspect, being taken care of, and reciprocal love that he is proposing to her, to say, trust me, I'll care about you the way that nobody else can. No, none of these Jedi can.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's another part of it as well, is so in many cases, the woman will flee to the demon lover because her husband has been in some way inadequate. Notably, one of the taboos that the earthly husband will break that will cause her to flee is lying to her. And what we've already said, she was like a bride of the Jedi, right? So I know that Soul's her father figure, but the point is that what did he do?
She's married to the Jedi. Yeah.
She's married to the Jedi, and he's the symbol of the Jedi to her. And so he lied to her. We don't know all the details yet, but we know that's what happened. He misrepresented something to her. And so she effectively then flees the Jedi and into the arms of the demon lover, who typically does actually care for her and fulfill her in ways that she doesn't get, in the mundane world.
Yeah. And how does this resolve usually?
I mean, it depends, right? Because it depends who's telling the story. And this is why I say the question of whether it's a cautionary tale is a really important one, because If it's a patriarchal perspective, then yes, it's a cautionary tale. And what typically ends up happening is she has to actually undergo an exorcism of sorts to rid her of the demon lover, which is why when Sol says, oh, we have to go rescue your sister. Oh, I don't think that's going to go the way that he expects, because she does not want to be rescued at this point. By the end of this episode, she is not interested in being rescued, and she's not going to want to be rescued. She does not believe she needs to be. And so, there will be an attempt by patriarchy to purge her of this evil influence. And in some stories, she says no, and she just goes with him. And again, depending on, sometimes, again, if it's a patriarchal perspective, that's viewed as a tragedy, like, oh, this poor lost woman, look what happened to her. But sometimes it's viewed as this glorious escape, like she escaped the mundane fantasy world. Like, that good for her gift. Like, right? Exactly.
And both Missy and I will be like, good for you, Osha.
Yes, good for you, Osha. Yes, exactly.
And I actually talked about on the Patreon in my post about how I thought it could resolve in Chimera being healed. As an example, as if he dies, Osha and May coming together, the power of two coming together to heal him, would be an alchemical union that would satisfy kind of all of the beats of the story that we had seen. And then he would be transformed into the three of them, creating a triangle, a three. There's so many threes in this freaking story. It's like they made it for me. that it would turn out to be exactly that, which is that, alchemically, the outcome of an alchemical union is to produce a Kondiniko, which is a divine child, or to have a triangle in the end. So the outcome of an alchemical union is the three. So we'll see. I mean, I want to say that there are lots of possibilities. I personally think that it's going to end up being like dark side somehow, just because that's kind of always been the vibe of what everyone has talked about throughout this story, but I'm here for it.
Yeah, I think more characters than not are going to end up on the dark side. Like between Osha, May, and Kainai, like I think we're going to get minimum 2/3 dark side by the end of the series or the season, and that I think that possible all three. So we'll see. So
this still classifies as a Dark Union episode, of course, because Chimera is capturing her. This is claiming his bride in the sort of steps of the maiden's positive path. It's actually a positive step for her to be claimed by the darkness, because then she's leaning into her own desires and allowing her to speak her own desires out into the world. So a dark union, of course, is an anti-alchemical one-sided event that subsumes the person's power and energy for the co-opter. It hasn't gotten to that part yet, but the proposal has been made. And so if she were to lean into the dark side, I don't see a way that it would be a balanced relationship for her.
No, I can't see it either. It's not likely that it would be a balanced relationship, because neither of them are in a place excuse me, where they can fully, be equals. Even though he wants to be it, even though he's fairly submissive for most of this episode, he still kind of has his own agenda, and he intends for her to assist with that agenda. And it's fair to assume that, he's not about to set aside his desires to prioritize hers.
I think that he is telling her everything that she wants. And I have a few instances of that throughout the whole episode that I do want to point out. I was asked today, actually, if I thought that he was being manipulative. And I don't actually think that he is
either
being manipulative. I think he is just sharing his own loneliness and his own rage and his own emotions. And she is finding truth in that reflection.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think that he's not trying to corrupt her. He's not trying to manipulate her. Everything that he shares with her is honest.
Yeah. I do want to point out that Sol acts as a predator this episode for May.
Yes, he does.
And so that's really important, because she also has been struggling with the idea of the authority of the Jedi her whole life and has been under the thumb of the authority trying to break out of it. But the Predator has to challenge her to wake up from her naivety that what she thought was happening was actually happening. And so it's almost like they've switched places, which is sort of wonderful. And, I really love it. So yeah, Soul is acting like a predator. Do I think that he will be a predator permanently? He's not Bluebeard, but he is acting like a predator, which is to pull herself to basically say, I'm going to claim you and take you back to my way of thinking. But she's going to break free of that as well and find her own path.
And this is also why I do feel like the Bluebeard aspect is still really strong here, because a big part of the Bluebeard tale is the relationship between the sisters, or sometimes siblings, usually sisters. They together, it's the only way they're ultimately able to escape the Predator. And so again, I think there's a probability that we all end up on the dark here together, but at a minimum, at some point, it's going to be Osha and May to the exclusion of other parties, because that's what this story is about. And it's about what they can do together. And they may not fully realize that by the end of the story, but I do think that's where we're headed.
The next thing I wanted to briefly talk about was caves in the underworld. Of course, the underworld is another term for the subconscious, unconscious part of your adventure's journey. So when Joseph Campbell talked about the hero's journey, when you actually go onto an internalized spiritual journey and you enter into the unknown, you're going into a version of your own unconscious. That is symbolically the underworld. You are going to be on a journey to die. So we talked about Inanna and Eresh Kigal and how Inanna descends into the underworld to meet her sister, and she basically dies at the end, at the lowest point, to be reborn. This is a fundamental symbol in mythical storytelling that we see, especially in Star Wars. You often see caves as the point of transformation, where inside of the darkness you find that treasure that you never knew you needed to find inside of it. And that is the elixir. That is the thing that you never knew you needed. And this ties briefly into mining as a theme. And I have episodes on all of these, so I'm not going to go into them, but you can go back and listen to them. Mining is a theme and a symbol of the dark side because it consumes and does not replace. And in this, we actually have a slight mining motif in the fact that he is mining cortosis from the cave, this very feminine caved island situation. He is taking of the cortosis for his own weapons and needs.
Yep. Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool, actually, that they referenced that.
And so mining is the reverse of what you're supposed to do in the darkness with a treasure hunt in finding the secret within yourself. It is taking the secret from a cave that doesn't belong to you.
I like that. And I also think it's reflective of the Dark Union, right? Because that's also taking, that's also consuming, you know, and not replacing, because it's not a reciprocal equal relationship. And therefore, you know, you, like you said, you take energy, but you don't put energy back.
Exactly. I just wanted to talk briefly about the eclipse symbolism. We didn't get any in this episode specifically, but there has been amazing eclipse symbolism on the posters that have come out from every episode as they moved closer together. In the last episode's poster, the soul, the sun, was entirely eclipsed, and standing underneath it was the stranger in his mask.
So cool.
We did get more of Osha in the sunlight and May in the darkness. And then they sort of like switched a lot in darkness and light. It was fun, this episode, but no direct eclipse symbolism because they're moving away from each other in opposite directions.
Right. They're moving out of eclipse. They've passed through and now they're separating again.
Yep, exactly. All right. Are you ready to talk about episode 6, Teach / Corrupt?
I'm so excited. Let's go. Oh, it'll be a fun time.
Osha awakens disoriented in her cave. Yes, cave. Because
of course she does.
underworld. He drags her into his underworld, into his darkness, into his unconscious. She's oriented in a small bed, very small, very tiny, one-person bed, with her head facing a black hole that looks like it was like built in there at some point. And so it sort of shows the void symbolically that is in her life that she hasn't yet filled. The cave itself is a small home. It's outfitted with the evidence of bandages, a pool. It is, of course, nothing like what we expect, because there's soup on, there's a salad. Yeah,
it doesn't look like an
water to drink.
Lair, right? This doesn't look like an evil lair at all. What's going on? There's all this evidence of care here. Something is not right.
Yep. And so her assumptions are being broken down at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And so the first thing she does when she gets up, she gets a drink of water. This foreshadows later when she will finally eat the food of the underworld, but that happens much later in the episode. This is just a drink, but this is important because this is similar to in Willow. We talked about the motif of thirst and how when a character thirsts, they're desperate for truth, but also they tend to become so desperate that they will accept anything because they're just at the edge of their sanity and their tolerance. And so we saw in Willow, it was Eric who had just been so broken down that he had nothing left, and it was very easy to turn him for Lily. And in the case of Osha, again, we talked about how she's going to have everything stripped away. She's going to be incredibly susceptible to anything that Chimera has to say, which again, to the point, does not mean that what he's saying to her is not sincere or is not true, but she is at a point where she will be the most receptive to it because she is thirsty. She is desperate.
Exactly. She sees a little creature. Of course, this is our anteater duck's baby.
The
Skura that is leading her out of the cave, but she notices a pack. She goes for it. There's a knife, which she grabs. She finds clothing and shoes, which fit her because they are her sisters.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's interesting because the dagger that she picks up is the most aggressive weapon that we have seen Osha handle up to this point. Prior to this, she only ever had the stun gun, or she had no weapon at all. So this was,
or she just had Pip, who was kind of like her guardian. Or she had Pip. Like familiar,
but he wasn't really a weapon per se, So like we haven't really seen her handle a truly aggressive weapon yet, and this is the first time we've seen her do it. And this is the hint that she is starting to very slowly, finally, pass out of that damsel phase into maybe something a little more aggressive because she's moving out of her passive phase. So very interesting.
I wanted to ask you what you thought of the clothes.
I mean, we've talked about this before about how, listen, Luke went from white to gray to black in his trilogy, and I thought that was just so perfect. I'm forever annoyed that Rey went from white to gray to what? White again? Whiter? What's that all about? And granted, there was a moment of dark gray, but it was So I have really been looking forward to seeing more of this progression actually happen for a character again, where you can actually see in their costuming them going through this full cycle and this full exploration of their darkness, not shying away from it, not pinging back at the last second, cautionary tale nonsense. She's going to go all in. And so seeing her in the full gray outfit, and especially on this Octo looking planet, I'm just like, oh, yes, it's back. It's back. My favorite part of Star Wars is back.
Last episode, you talked about how when the husband cloaks the bride, he is claiming her. And so
he did, and she took the clothes.
She took the clothes. I was going to check. I was like, okay, so does this mean that she has accepted him, basically? Even though
that's what she does throughout the episode, though. Throughout the episode, she she accepts the clothes. She, accepts the food eventually.
The water, the lightsaber.
The lightsaber. The invitation.
Helmet.
The invitation to try on the helmet. Like, she gradually takes on these things and accepts them. So yes, throughout the entire episode, she is choosing to take into herself or on herself, depending on what it is, these parts of his world. And what it means is that she's taking in the lessons that he has taught her and what he is trying, the revelations, and her being honest with herself. Like, this is what that is representative of, is her saying. So when he says, I've accepted my darkness, blah, 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 and we know he's full of it. But in her case, she hasn't fully accepted her darkness, but she has begun the process of doing it by putting on clothes. So she puts on the clothes, and in a typical Swan Maiden tale, she would try to reclaim her old animal skin, and she would want to escape with that. So sometimes they have wings or whatever, and they'll try to steal the wings back and then fly away, right? Well, she has the opportunity to do that. The ship's right there. He tells her you can swim to it, or you can, go over at low tide. So he gives her the opportunity to escape. And the fact that she chooses not to is how you know she's not the damsel anymore. She's not the Swan Maiden. She's not just looking for that opportunity to escape. She's actually willing to listen, to stay, to integrate all of these things into herself. So this is really, really important.
And I think that it's also really important to point out that, like, part of all of the archetypes that we're talking about, it's about initiating into the next stage and then integrating the darkness that comes with the next stage. And it's a very internal, external ebb and flow to the process of becoming more mature, understanding the world better, understanding yourself better, all of that.
Speaking of internal, external, etc., I'm looking forward to pointing out the number of times they pass between the inside and the outside of the cave.
Oh, the threshold, yeah.
Yes, very big into that. That was pretty cool.
So she follows the little bird out, and it reveals this island that they're on, and it's full of life and rebirth. We have a huge ocean in front of us. The family of the birds are there all together. It was like they took a porg and a thala together. But they made children.
But they turn away from her. So the first time when she saw one inside the cave, it sort of scurried away in fear. Mm-hmm. And later when she passes the little family on the beach, one of them like turns away from her and bows his head. They almost appear to be afraid of her.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting.
Very interesting.
We also have the huge ocean and her sort of trapped, like you said, like, she can't leave easily. Carl Jung talks about how the sea was his favorite symbol for the unconscious because it is the mother of all that lives. And so it's this incredible femme symbol.
Mm-hmm.
And, to me, this all points to the idea that, you have no choice but to grow up. You have to individuate from the society that you grew up in. You have to become your own person. And there is no choice. You have to face the predator. And so that's what she decides to do. She turns, and I laughed my head off because somebody was like, how long is he waiting for her to wake up
notice him?
To be noticed?
Yeah.
As he walks towards his bathing pool.
Yes.
So on Kofor, we flash to Sol leaving, and he tries to communicate to the Jedi saying, emergency code 0, my whole team is dead.
Oh my God. And can we just talk about his acting? Oh my gosh. Lee Jung-jae brings it in this episode. Absolutely incredible. It's painful, truly painful to watch because it's his devastation is so real. But here's the other thing, Marie Claire. Did you see the slash on his tunic?
No.
It's on his chest on the left side. It's right over his heart.
He's been wounded, quote unquote, on the left side.
Yep. There's a slash over his heart on his tunic.
Okay, so we have been talking about this in relation to the Fisher King motif, which of course is that the Jedi are wounded. In the Fisher King, the Fisher King is wounded in his thigh, his left thigh, and that is an indication of how sick the kingdom is. And last episode, there was so many thigh injuries.
Yeah, a lot of thigh injuries. Yeah.
Just to show how sick the Jedi are and that this is a damage that goes deeper than skin deep. It is not something that you can be fixed easily.
Yeah.
There's a sickness that needs to be healed by the Grail, oddly.
Yeah. What's that about?
And the Grail is the ultimate elixir. It is also the thing that we get from alchemical union, from the elixir within ourselves. It is symbolic and emblematic of that. May approaches. She's got this like a similar knife to Osha.
Yeah, well, they both have the daggers.
Yeah, and she's like, I'm gonna kill this guy. And he's like,
but she hears the memory of the test that she took with Master Andara as a child.
Yeah.
So we've only seen Osha's perspective of that. So this is the first hint we get of May being in there and her test and how that went. So it's very interesting to get this tiny little like moment of that.
And she's approaching Saul like he's the predator. So again, we kind of see this parallel, and the comms are down, and he's like, you know, of course, the comms and the communication disruption can only mean one thing: invasion. No, actually, it means that he's out of sync with the Jedi. He is not on the same path as them. That's symbolically what that means.
Yep.
Soul hits the console in frustration and anger, showing how hot his emotions are running to the surface. And of course, Basil is sniffing out of it. And I'm obsessed with the mischievous play of the music that Basil has whenever he goes and does things.
I love it. And
he goes and tries and fixes Pip.
But it's interesting because if you watch him in this episode, he doesn't just mistrust May. He also appears to mistrust Soul. He is keeping his distance from both of them.
Yeah, no, he doesn't go and approach Soul and say, "Hey, I'm alive."
Yeah. No, he kind of like hides the whole time.
He just trusts Pip, and then Pip is taken from him.
I know. Oh, poor Basil.
Right. Let's get to the Chimera pool.
Oh my God. Horniest scene in Star Wars, guys. Here we go.
Scene in Star Wars. So, Chimera undresses when Osha is watching, and we know as the audience that he knows that she knows.
Yeah. And this is what I want to talk about because so there was a question about this that we got from one of the listeners. And I wanted to wait until we got to this point to talk about it. Bathing as a motif. Nakedness as Candace, a motif. Yes. Excellent question. There's a lot going on here. So first of all, in a animal husband story, and actually in an animal bride story as well, any animal spouse story, often seeing the lover in a state of undress, seeing them bathing, and then obviously also without the animal skin on, which clothes and animal skin are really treated, interchangeably in folklore. But seeing them in that way, what it means is that you're seeing their true self. And that is a taboo. That is a thing. You're not supposed to see them as they truly are. You're really only supposed to see the skin, the facade, the animal skin or the clothing or whatever. And so it is just forbidden to see the lover undressed, in a state of undress, and particularly bathing. And many times this is how people will come upon a god or a goddess or something like that. They'll find them at their bath, like, oh no, and then they'll be horribly punished. And so what makes this such a fascinating part is a few things. So first of all, Chimera, he is not just like surprised by this. This is all by design. He knows she's there. He intends for her to see him. This is all deliberate. Again, not manipulative so much as just he understands her and he understands what this means for her to see him in such a vulnerable state. So that is what is going on here, is he is willing to be in the most vulnerable possible position for her so that he can basically just get her to listen to him. Really. Mm-hmm. But when she comes upon him and he is, undressed and bathing, in a typical tale, she would then be in some way punished for that. And notably, she is not.
Nope. No consequences.
No, there are no consequences. And so that's how you know that this is a different type of story. If you think about, again, people love to make the Raylo comparison. Well, Ray comes upon Kylo when his shirt is off. Right? That's her seeing him in a state of undress without his animal skin on, etc., and everything. And ultimately, he does flee. I mean, it happens a few scenes later, right? After the throne room fight. But he does flee, and that is ultimately because she saw the real him, and he couldn't have that, and so he bailed. And Chimera doesn't do that. He allows her to see the real person inside, or the real monster, as the case may be, and he does not flee, and he doesn't punish her. And so this story is very different. It is playing with the motifs in ways that we do not often see. And I personally really love that.
This sort of trope of the bathing beauty is one that we often see with femme fatales, like James Bond, the femme fatale going into the water, who knows that James Bond is like watching. Amethyst Starchild actually pointed this out, that, and I totally saw it as well, that it kind of reminded them of Silkies or of a merman. They were kind of noticing in that. And actually, I really do feel like that's the intention. But so Jung actually talks about how the mermaid archetype was developed and psychologically as a way to project your anima out there into the ocean. And it's an alchemical metaphor that talks about how transformative structures of the unconscious are coming for you, right? So the idea is that Chimera is functioning as a sexually appealing animus to Osha. And we talked about how he had replaced her animus in last episode. So this is the internalized masculine part of her. And he is dipping into the unconscious, showing what lies beneath, a mirror of the reflective truth of the unconscious, because a pool of water represents the barrier to our unconscious, the unknown underneath. There's also a waterfall. I don't know if you spotted that. So the pool actually drains into a waterfall. And so waterfalls remind us of our interconnectedness to all things. Like how water merges with rivers and eventually reaches the ocean, we are reminded that this is part of the universe and the collective consciousness. What does that sound like? The force. So what is happening is part of the force. It's natural. Oh my gosh, I'm in love.
There's so many cool things. There's also just the simple fact that it's cleansing, right? It's cleansing. It's another pool femsimilism, womb-like. So he is going into the water. He's going to come out reborn. That's why we see him go from the black clothing before he goes into the white clothing when he comes out.
And he's going to be appearing differently to her in her eyes.
Yes.
All of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
She will see him differently after this.
She holds the knife and she's like, maybe this isn't a big enough one, because she sneaks up and grabs the lightsaber, okay, let's talk about lightsabers and Star Wars.
Oh boy.
Okay, so they often represent ruling power, projection. They're a symbol of the Jedi. They represent your life. And actually, one thing that is being pulled from the High Republic is people don't pull a lightsaber, turn on a lightsaber unless they intend to kill, because nobody has anything that can stop a lightsaber except for Chimera. This is an important part of the High Republic. And so it's chivalry, as well. And it's like the idea that the Jedi are kind of judge, jury, and executioner too, which is really interesting. But the sword, The lightsaber is phallic when it is turned on, and when it is sheathed, it is yonic. So it is both femme and masculine symbolism in one, two, your chalice and blade symbolism. It is both. Turning on the lightsaber is, the aggressive act, whereas turning off the lightsaber is the passive act.
Right. But when it is off with the possibility of being turned on, the potential is still there, and therefore it is leaning into the masculine. And in this case in particular, because it's his and she's taking it. And that makes that's her sort of, taking
preparing.
Right. Taking that masculine power. And, to your point about chalice and blade, this is one of the places where you see it. She already took the smaller blade with the dagger, but now she traded it in for the bigger blade. The much more phallic one that belongs to him. And he, meanwhile, is swimming in a pool, which is the chalice. So he is, so again, we're leaning really hard into she is taking on the masculine principle here, and he is taking on the feminine principle. And this is one of the first places that we really see that in the episode.
And he says, not looking at her, but knowing she's there, how does it feel? Okay.
And I have in all caps here, Marie Claire, it's like a sex scene.
I blushed. I squealed.
It just definitely shocked me. Because how does it feel? I mean, here's the thing, right? Not that we need to spell this out, but yes, he's talking about how does it feel to hold a lightsaber again, but also this is a thing that people say to one another when they are being intimate.
Mm-hmm.
And she's holding his lightsaber, and he wants to know how it feels.
Feels good, doesn't it?
It does feel good.
To hold one in your hands.
And and the fact that they use the indefinite article to hold one, not to hold a lightsaber in your hand, but to hold one in your hand. What are you talking about, sir? Please tell me.
And truthfully, it has been a long time for her to hold a lightsaber in her hands.
It's true. It's been a bit.
I wrote down in my notes, MC have better thoughts than just horny ones.
No, see, it's funny. My notes just say horny in all caps, so it's okay. We were on the same page. That's good to know, Marie Claire.
Have better thoughts. No.
Listen. We can do both, okay? We could be very analytical, and we can also be horny, okay? We contain multitudes.
I assume you didn't keep your own lightsaber when you left the order. Yes. It's probably taken away from her, or she had to give it up. We've seen this happen, with Ahsoka leaving the order, and she raises it up because she's been startled. Your stance is good. You should keep your other elbow higher. Allows for a swifter block. We already know she doesn't block well.
That's right. You know what? I didn't even think of that. You're right. You never could block. Yeah, you're right. Solid point.
So maybe this is going to teach her a more whole aspect of herself where she can actually use that power for herself. Stay where you are, she says, pointing the lightsaber at him, holding it right in front of herself.
Yeah.
In a phallic way.
Two-handed grip. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're not going to join me, I'd like to put my clothes back on.
Oh my God.
This is the sexiest line that in Star Wars.
For real, what if you're not going to join me? I mean, he's leaving it out there that was entirely a possibility.
I mean, she is pointing a lightsaber at him, but he's maybe.
Yeah.
He's doing the naked man. If you don't get that joke from How I Met Your Mother.
Oh, yeah. It's been a while.
It's been a while. But he's in the unconscious, so he's, he's bathing, which of course he's in there, and he's come join me in your unconscious, see what you've been missing.
He's the incubus.
Mm-hmm. And she backs up and is oh, you're wondering if it's honorable to kill me like this. Heat of the battle, it's justified, but a few hours later it's vengeance. And we hear Kylo's theme play in high strings as he exits the water, which is really interesting. Those are anxiety strings. They're not good, happy strings, just to let you know. now you were wondering how I can read your mind. I can't. Not exactly. Your anger betrays your thoughts.
But also during this entire monologue of his, her eyes keep flicking down. And I was laughing so hard. I was like, oh my gosh, Osha. His eyes are up here.
I sent you so many memes today.
So great.
Of course, this is like, it's taking her off guard.
Yes.
It's stripping her away of her defenses because he's making her defenseless in his confidence.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole thing, right? Is that's why his reaction to her seeing him is different from what we typically get in the folktale, is because he wants her to see him. He wants her to confront the things that she refuses to confront. He wants her to be forced to consider everything that she's been in denial about for so long. So it's really important. So this is vital. He is, it's very exhibitionist of him, but he knows that she needs this. She has to be made uncomfortable in order to get to the truth about herself.
Exactly. Did you kill Sol? No. Did you kill May? No. And I put in little like brackets. I mean, I tried, but
I gave it my best shot.
Interesting that you ask about him first. He taught you the Jedi arts, but he's more than that to you. A special relationship, isn't it? Master and pupil. It's almost like he's wistful.
Yeah, that's your hint that he sort of, he misses his own master and pupil relationship, and it was likely hurtful for him or whatever it was. That's where we start to understand why he wants a pupil so badly and why he wants an apprentice is because he must have had this relationship and it went very sour.
And we now know what his AO3 tags are. His preferences.
Oh yeah,
master pupil, master apprentice.
Oh my God.
Teacher student.
It's going to be too late by the time we're done for me to go on AO3, but first thing tomorrow, I am there.
May parks the ship. We flash back to May. She parks the ship into like the hyperspace engine part of the ship, and Sol approaches her and gives her a
I know. And she looks so startled. She's not used to displays of affection. She doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, she's a little like sometimes when you capture a cat and you hug them and they're
exactly like, what are you doing? Let me go. Exactly.
You saved us, Osha. Your sister, she was corrupted, but you saved us.
That man, he pushed me to a place that I'm sorry. It's time to make things right. It's time for me to face the High Council, to tell them everything.
Oh my God.
And
spill your beans.
Yeah. And she seems, on the one hand, she seems kind of surprised by his remorse. And on the other hand, when he says, tell them everything, she has like skeptical face. And she's like, everything? Like she doesn't really trust him to come clean. And as she should, frankly, because I don't think he has a good track record of honesty at this point. So I think it makes sense that and this is important too, because yes, he's her predator in this episode and he's pushing her, but she's also pushing him. Nothing else has really convinced him to finally confront his past, confront his shadow. And the presence of May is going to finally do that. So They both push each other.
In a way that Osha couldn't, because he had that relationship under wraps and he was the reason she was a damsel.
Yep. Yeah. But you can't do that with a vixen, especially not when she's not your vixen. So it's true.
The power is lost on the ship, right? Sort of trapping them in this environment. And he's like, do you want to go take a look? And May looks like she wants to stab him with her eyes.
I know. She's just like,
this guy.
Well, but I like that. I like that they have this interesting, obviously there's the antipathy because she hates him and she's trying to kill him. But on the other hand, they have to do these mundane things of take the wheel and go check out the control room and da-da-da. It's, so just funny the way they're doing these, just tasks about the ship, and they're the only ones that can do them because the rest of the crew is dead. So, it's
like Among Us on easy mode with no traitors.
It is. Or maybe they're both traitors. I don't know. That's hilarious.
Maybe.
Yeah. Funny.
Vernestra is on a call. So we flash to the Jedi Council, and she's on a call, and she's talking to somebody she knows in the Senate. It's like, Senator Ravencourt is going after you.
They're gonna.
He's never been a friend of the Jedi. Mm-hmm. They're going to do an investigation. It's like, well, the Jedi have always been transparent to the Senate. Nothing to worry about. And she's like,
I
laughed.
Yeah, I laughed too. I was like, wow, what a poker face you have there.
And then we have her Mog, who comes in. And he says there's been a transmission from Sol, and he seems like the most Coruscantian. Like, this guy is going to be a guy in the Imperial Navy at some point.
Yeah.
It's like, he just like if this had been 200 years in the future, he would have been part of the First Order. He just seems like a guy with a stick up his butt.
He definitely does. Yeah. Actually, now that I think of it, there's some very subtle Hux vibes going on there. So. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's been a transmission from Sol. The entire team's been lost. And Vernestra's like, well, I've got to go then.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, she immediately is like, all right, we'll put together a team. And he's like, well, how do you know he's there? I sent him there. Okay. Well, so. Yeah. And so I think she senses immediately, oh, this is all blowing up in my face now. Right. Mm-hmm. Because her whole thing was, we got to do this quietly. We got to keep it under wraps. Don't tell the council. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't want the Senate to know. And now, apparently everyone is dead. Well, you F this up, Vernestra. So she knows. At
least she's she's
taking responsibility pretty much right away. But she owns a lot of this.
Exactly. So we have Osha and Kaimir on the walk back, and you speak as if you were a Jedi, she says. I was a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. And then, I've never heard of you. Well, it was a really long time ago.
Really long time ago. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
We've talked a lot about how a long time ago is synonymous with fairy tale language of once upon a time. Yep. And so I know what the obvious choice is, and we'll get into that later. I know what the obvious choice is based on how they're outlining the episode. Mm-hmm. But what if he is really friggin' old?
I would kind of love if he was really friggin' old. I would really love it. I mean, I'm with you about the likely direction they're taking this and how they're setting everything up. But I think it would be cool if he was prime Jedi, age.
Yeah. What if he actually has all the memory of the Sith?
Oh, that would be so cool. That'd be so cool.
What if he doesn't even remember his name?
Okay, here's my only problem with that. If that happens, it would make it extra super tragic, because here's the thing. He and Osha, despite their affinity, are not the dyad. She and her sister are the dyad. So if he's been waiting centuries and centuries and centuries to find someone, then he's just going to be lonely, and I'm going to be sad.
Unless May and, Osha can heal him. Then there would be a solution to that, right? This is a good point. I mean, I just want to read a fan fiction about this or write it myself.
Yeah. Well, no, you're right. I mean, when you think about it, it makes sense, right? Because it's the power of two. The power of two does not have to include him. Mm-mm. He doesn't have to be part of the two in order to benefit from the power of two. Yeah, That's a good point.
But he could also be part of it if he's healed then. True. And then it's the power of many and stuff like that. So there's some really interesting things. But man, if he is really old, it would be so sexy.
we love a 1,000-year age gap around here.
I'm good with an age gap that much. Also, he could have been keeping himself alive through healing himself. He could be quite old.
Yeah, definitely.
In general, Vernestra has been around for over 300 years. So she says, why did you bring me here? Here's the first point where he's started to reflect back to her instead of directly answering a question. So he answers a question with a question just like that questions game and how in like improv.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Like, why did you bring me here? Why do you think?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's the start of him like really doing the pushback so that he gets what she thinks first before he responds. So she responds leverage, and he says, well, playing into her ego, everyone does seem to want you.
Yep. Yeah. And what he's doing there is prompting her to ask herself why, because she's never really thought about it before. She's thought she's not important. She's incidental. And what he's pointing out is like, no, everyone wants you. Why would that be? And this is where then the conversation turns to, well, she says, well, Soul will find me. And of course, again, this is her still kind of like clinging to that damsel role. He's gonna come save me. Like, that's where she is right now. Right. And what she's saying is she assumes, because she says, well, he's, he can always find me because of his power in the Force. And he's like, no. He's like, that's not because of his power in the Force. That's because of your power in the Force. And this is what she doesn't quite get, is when Soul consents her in order to be able to come to her, it's not because he's just that powerful. It's because she's so powerful, he can't help but sense her. And that is what Kaimir's trying to tell her, what the stranger is trying to tell her. He's trying to say, you are so powerful that even these very powerful other people are drawn to you. Everyone wants you, Osha, because you're so powerful. And she doesn't get it yet.
And it ties back to this, like the Umber Moss and her being the light and things like that, actually. And so, I love how he says that she has power and that she's not weak, like it's starting to open up her eyes. And this is a common motif that happens in heroine's journey story. So it is important to talk about both women who run with the wolves from an anti-patriarchal, no patriarchy lens, but it's also important to talk about the heroine's journey, because how do you wake up from patriarchy and to your own femme power under patriarchy? Well, this symbolism is going to be there, which is that you realize that you have power within yourself that has been told, no, be quiet, be calm, don't make a fuss, don't lean into your emotions, don't express anything. Yeah. And he is absolutely playing with that.
And this is when he tells her she can leave at any time. Well, again, you can swim across or you can wait for low tide. And then as he walks away, he says, are you hungry? Like he's going to,
he's going to feed her, which is also a short, the dark side is always hungry. I think that it's really important, but it's also like role reversal from what we would typically think is happening. Because he's caring for her.
Right. Yeah. Well. He's going to feed her. He's going to take care of her. He's already been taking care of her. But also are you hungry can mean so many things. So hunger is desire. So it's, is there something you want, basically? And so what he just did is he just whetted her appetite by saying, no, actually, you're really powerful. And then walks away, says, are you hungry? What he means is, do you want to hear more? Do you want to learn more? Yeah. And then obviously there's also the desire aspect in a sexual sense, which is all over this episode. But the point is, he's basically kind of like throwing out a line and saying, all right, well, you can go if you want, but if you want more, follow along. And so she does.
Yeah, no, and he gives her a way out like a couple of times to basically say, like, I'm not keeping you here. But I have more to give, which is it's not manipulative. He's giving her ways out of the story or out of this scenario. He leaves her with the weapon. He allows her to see where she can go and how she can leave. But he's very confident in his mannerisms, and so she's not going to leave.
But also there was that line in the earlier scene where she asked if she was his prisoner, and he's like, prisoner? Well, you're the one with the weapon. And similarly in that scene again, and then in other scenes throughout the episode, a lot of times he is below her a little bit Like she will often be raised above him. That's very common. They do that a lot. He is frequently taking a submissive stance toward her. That's very common. And so their dynamic is so fascinating. The way that, again, she really embodies that masculine principle throughout this episode, and he's embodying the feminine. And again, to go back to, are you hungry? He's going to feed her, and it's so fascinating. I just enjoyed every minute of it.
We return to May, who is trying to figure out what's wrong with the ship. And she approaches Basil and Pip. And Pip is being plugged into like a console by Basil. And Basil threatens her and approaches her and is the cutest thing. And
she's like, I'm going to beat you up. Blah! Like he's doing all these kicks and everything. It's so funny.
Yeah. And he stomps on her foot. And Pip squirts her in the face with some sort of like oil or shit. And so she takes Pip and factory resets him and finds him a body, and his lights go from white to red.
It's like the opposite of a lightsaber, right? It's like similar to like bleeding a lightsaber. It's like kind of like she bled Pip.
She bled Pip.
It's so sad. But also like it's also like a piece of Osha that has returned to May. Pip is her sister's heart. He is her animal familiar in some ways. Like it's really important then that he becomes May's companion after being Osha's.
Yeah. Because it also it'll open her up to caring for something else too, which is like, the idea that if you're recovering from something, you got to start with a plant and then you can get a pet and then you can have a relationship.
I love it.
We see the little family
Skura, and they nuzzle each other. They're like cuddling. It's so cute.
Cuddling. Yeah. And they go back into the cave. What did you mean by my strength in the Force? So she's hungry for more information. Yes. If you don't train, you lose it. Well, that's what they told you. I'm dying.
Listen, this feels a little too pointed to me, but I love it because I personally don't really subscribe to the whole talent without training is nothing perspective. And I like that this is kind of the direct opposition to that, which is that actually your power doesn't come from training. It comes from your emotions.
It comes from your emotions. Your emotions give you power. It also is aligning to something that is common in feminine mythic motifs, which is that you are powerful without anything. You just have to remember that you're powerful. You just have to recognize that you're powerful. And that is common in the heroine's journey. It is also common in the wild woman archetype, where you have bones and they have memory from ancient times, and you just have to remember that. And so I think it's really important because he's the one who's telling her this, and it's tied to being a whole version of yourself, including what he says, which is the Jedi teach that there's only one way to access the Force. If you don't do it that way, it fades. But there's another way below the surface of consciousness are powerful emotions: anger, fear, loss, and desire.
And he pauses before the last one so that he can place emphasis on it. And I'm like, you little slut.
He's stirring soup, and he's stirring shit up. And she's like, but that's the path to the dark side, you demon. And he's like, semantics. Oh my God, the way he says semantics.
Yes.
Okay. So I do want to remind people about my episode on morality in Star Wars, because it's very important to just kind of take a step back and go, okay, the societal construct of the Jedi and how they go about restricting the Jedi and doing what they do is entirely made up. Their morality, their purity morality, is entirely made up. And it's there because people have come together and said, this is the way that our society is going to operate. But it doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. There are other ways. Societies have existed in, and morality has existed in tons of different ways throughout the ages. So I think it's really important that like it's the Jedi way is not necessarily the only way. And
it's also not the only quote unquote good way or the only quote unquote light way. And this is really important is, you know, a lot of people are very sensitive about how critical this show is of the Jedi. We talked about this a lot last episode and how we felt that some people were really misunderstanding the show because of they just couldn't accept the criticisms of the Jedi. But the thing is that is the stance that this show takes, which is not to say the Jedi are bad or that there aren't obviously many very good, noble Jedi or anything like that. But it's willing to delve more into the complexity and the gray and to say that not only can Jedi sometimes be bad, but maybe Sith can sometimes be good. What? Like, and this is really important that it gets into all of this because repression and denial do not bear healthy fruit. They don't do it in reality and they don't do it in story. And this is something that the Sith Code and the philosophy that Chimera espouses here to Osha, this is something that says very plainly and very honestly. And I think that's important that the fandom, that the audience is forced to grapple with that.
Well, and you know, we've talked about this, but the idea that two opposing ideas can be both true at the same time is the challenge of Star Wars. And when you get to it, there is good and bad in all of us, and you're not just one or the other, then you actually start to kind of level up from an understanding of what Star Wars is trying to teach you.
Yeah. So we go immediately from that into, you murdered my friends. And he says, I killed Jedi. I killed those who threaten my existence. So again, he feels that his actions are defensive. He feels that he must protect himself. And that's why he does this. It doesn't make it okay. It doesn't mean he's not a murderer. It means in his mind, he is justified because he needs to protect himself. And then she says, you killed Yord. He goes, a man who didn't hesitate to turn you in for a crime you didn't commit. I mean, he's not wrong. We've been talking the whole time about how Yord's a cop, and he really is. So, you know, there you go. And then you killed Jecki. And this I found fascinating. He said, and where did you think that was going to go? You would have had the same relationship with her that you have with your master. One-sided. Why do you love people who can only go so far? Who can't go as deep as you can? He is, in my opinion, acknowledging not only just her affection and care for these people, but like that little flirtation we saw between Osha and Jecki, he's acknowledging even that. There was no potential for her to have anything deeper with these people because it is literally part of the Jedi code to not form attachments.
Yep. And this also gave me big Jareth, the Goblin King energy from Labyrinth. Just fear me, love me, do as I say, and I'll be your slave. Like it's like he was saying that, like to her, because he's really this manifestation of her desires. She wants to be loved. It's probably why she was super attached to Soul and why Soul was super attached to her. You know, he's saying everything she wants to hear. It doesn't mean it's not true from him. I think that's important because part of the Predator motif is that the Predator wants a willing bride. Yes. That's really, really important. And so he offers her food in the underworld.
Yeah, he holds out the bowl. And then again, we want to go back to the bowl is the chalice. He is, and the reason it's referred to this way and the reason that it is considered, the opposite in principle to the blade is because the blade is aggressive. It is, giving and almost attacking sometimes, whereas the chalice is receptive. A bowl collects, a bowl captures, a bowl, can hold something. And so this is what he's doing, is he's presenting himself as sort of this receptor. And he's almost saying, like, I can receive your emotions. I can handle your emotions. The Jedi cannot, but I can, right?
There's also, like, when you eat in the underworld, you become transformed by that, and you become partial with the underworld. Same with fairy food. You have to stay in fairy if you eat the fairy food. Anytime that there is a fairy tale where there's usually food involved, it's about temptation. It's about acceptance of this otherworldly experience. So, you know, like the apple in Snow White, the gingerbread house, and fundamentally, when you take that food into you, you become part of that
and so
world.
The famous,
the
famous example is Persephone, who, when she eats the pomegranate seeds in the underworld, then can never permanently return to Earth. Yeah. She has to always come back to the underworld several times, several months out of the year. And so this is the thing, is he offers this to her, and she's not ready to take it yet. So she says, I'm not my sister. I'm not that easily corrupted. She refuses the food, walks back outside into the light, but stays right there on the threshold.
Yep, exactly. And then he reminds her that she's taken his lightsaber with her.
Hey, wait, did you forget something? And there's two things he could have meant there too. He could have meant, like, hey, didn't you need to return that? That's mine. But he also could have meant, hey, didn't you intend to kill me? Didn't you intend to take your revenge? Are you going to do that or not?
Yeah, yeah. And he reminds her, you stayed here to do something. Do it. Turn it on. And he grabs the lightsaber and shoves it into his own stomach, basically. Like, wouldn't it be easy to do it? Just
he
in this
dares her,
to
turn it on. So again, to go back to, like, this is another moment in which, the phallic nature of the lightsaber is incredibly prominent, because, and again, with him having the feminine principle, because he's like putting it in his belly, and he's like, turn it on, do it. And she says, a Jedi doesn't attack the unarmed. And he, again,
and she tries to pull away. She
grabs her forearm,
and he holds it.
And it's important to note the way he grabs her forearm, because he's very rough. He, like, grabs it. He won't let her back up, like, so he's, he's got quite a firm grip on her. And he says, why do you still think of yourself as a Jedi? They didn't want you.
Yeah. And so, like, they're fighting almost over the symbol of this Jedi symbol, like the lightsaber itself and the talisman and the meaning of it. And she's like, no, I'm a Jedi. And he's like, no, you're not. Like, it's like, and like, she, like, that's not true. What do you feel right now? This is this anger, this pain. This is who you are. So he's like calling her out, and the Jedi saw it. And that's why they threw you away.
She starts to cry.
Why aren't you a Jedi? To cry,
she says,
why aren't you a Jedi?
Well, she says, they didn't throw me away. Then why aren't you a Jedi? And like you said, why aren't you a Jedi, Osha? And then she says, because I failed. And she ignites the saber.
And she shoves him and ignites the lightsaber and brings it to his throat, and is like shaking and looking at it, like not
and
really
has him backed up against the rock wall.
And I understand. I lost everything, Osha. When you lose everything, and he brings his hand to her arm and almost a caress.
And remember, a second ago, he was gripping it so hard, and now he's like caressing her arm so, like, tenderly.
That's when you are finally free, when you lose everything.
Yep. I know. Yes. Also, like, we joke about this a lot, right? When it comes to enemies to lovers. Hey, it's not real enemies to lovers unless somebody's got a blade to the throat at least once. So we're pleased to see it.
Exactly. We are pleased to see it. Vernestra and Mog have a brief scene where you get nauseous when you travel through hyperspace. And she's like, I just find it disconcerting as they're prepping to leave.
So cute. I love that.
We cut back to Basil, May, and Sol. How could I have not sensed that villain's true intention? And May's like, well, when you really want something, it clouds your mind.
Yeah. Yep. But also, Even the way,
found
I want to
him.
say though, before, like, even the way he calls to her when she's in the hallway, he goes, Osha, and it's like, yeah, he's calling to her to find out where he is, but where she is. But also, like, at this point, I think he suspects at this point. So when he calls out Osha, it's almost as if to say, is it you? So
Yeah.
he's definitely starting to work out what's going on.
And it's almost like
Yes.
he's testing her in this moment because he's like, you found him, and she doesn't respond. Your pip droid. Like who did I find? Yeah, he's okay now. I noticed the way you take care of him, talk to him, love him, even though he's just a machine. I've always been like that, even when I was little. I had to lose a lot of myself to become a Jedi. Have you ever told me everything that happened on Brendock? So like she's checking. Like,
have you ever told Osha the truth? And of course he hasn't. But it's also just she's acknowledging that, because remember when they were children and, you know, Osha was sitting there sweetly playing with the little like space butterfly. And then May came along and was like controlling it, kind of all creepy, evil omen child, basically. And and so this is May as an adult now. So we saw when May was a child, when May and Osha were children, that Osha was very caring. So she had the little space butterfly and she would, you know, be very sweet with it. And then May would come in as like the creepy omen child and try to control it and everything. And so what adult May is doing is recognizing that Osha has always been that way and has been caring. But now that they've been forced to switch places, she is the one that now has to care for Pip and has to be more caring. Whereas Osha, who always neglected herself in her care for others, is finally having to confront what it is that she really wants. So we're seeing them switch places in terms of May, who was focused entirely on herself and her own wants and needs, and now is having to think of other people, and Osha, who is the opposite. So that's what we're seeing when she says, you know, like, oh, I've always been like this even as a child, but then I've also had to give up a lot of myself to become a Jedi. So she knows on some level what trying to become a Jedi cost Osha.
Yep. And May moves to the comms because the comms suddenly come back on. The lights turn on. All the power's back on. And she goes, hey, you know, we're here. And Soul stuns her and says, oh, May.
Yep. And she was, prior to that, she was really pressuring him. She was, you know, because his excuse when she asked, well, did you tell me everything that happened on Brendock? His excuse was, well, you were very young. She says, but I'm not now. You can tell me. And then she repeats it. Well, you can tell me, Soul. And so she's really pushing him. And that's how he finally realizes, even though he suspected already, that's how he finally realizes it's May. So yeah, then once the lights are back up and she goes running off, he stuns her. He can see now the pattern on her forehead. So, you know, just the confirmation that it's her. And then he gets the message about the rescue party coming. Hey, don't turn off your transponder. But he does
turn his transponder.
Yes, against orders. And I think there's two parts to that. One is that I do think he wants to protect May, and he knows that the Jedi are not going to, you know, be kind to her. He knows that they're going to take her into custody and everything. So there's that. But there's also, you know, selfishly, he wants to get this guilt off his chest, and he has the opportunity and he's going to take it. So this is very much about him as well.
Exactly. Vern arrives just as he leaves into hyperspace. He like yeets himself into hyperspace very quickly. And they, you know, they have like this journey on the planet where they learn about the Umbra Moths hatching. And of course that's like, oh, all of the shadows and the baggage of the Jedi are being unleashed.
But I also think Mog is sus. And listen, I know I have egg on my face from thinking that Yord was sus. I get that. I accept that. But like twice now, this Mog person has been like, oh, I'm sure it's just because of the environment on that uncharted planet. Or, oh, I'm sure it's just the Umbra Moth. So like he's always trying to come up with reasons why these Jedi all died, and doesn't really want to go investigate, or doesn't want Vernestra to come investigate. And so I keep going like, what is his deal? Why does he keep trying to dissuade her from going out there. But in any case, when he says that, it was probably the Umbermoth colony, Vernestra is not convinced and leads them off into the forest.
For potential death.
Oh, boy.
So Chimera is fixing his helmet, and Osha is holding the bowl of soup.
She ate the food! She ate the food of the underworld! Oh, no!
Did you give the same pitch to my sister? I made a mistake with May. I thought she wanted more than just revenge. I thought she wanted what I want. And she's like, well, what do you want? The power of two. Oh my God.
The power of two. Yes. And this works on so many levels. It works with the witches, of course, who the power of one, the power of two, the power of many. It works as a dyad, which of course we've talked about from the beginning of the season. With twins, lovers, any of these can be dyads. And then, of course, it works with the Sith rule of two.
Yep. And also like a master and apprentice classically as well. Right. Although they would say that you should have no attachment to your apprentice. Sure.
Right. But we know he doesn't ascribe to that because he has already said, that it's a special relationship between the master and pupil. So,
but he lifts up his shirt to like wipe his face or something, and we see the scar, which we had seen earlier, but this allows her to question it, like, where'd you get that scar? And he again pushes that back to her to find out what her expectations are. How do you think I got it? Someone stabbed you in the back?
Right. And that's projection on her part to some extent. Like, I mean, she, on the one hand, she's probably not wrong, but on the other hand, she feels as though she's been backstabbed. So that's why she says that to him.
Exactly. And he's like, somebody threw me away. So very similar to Osha's story herself. Your Jedi Master, she answers.
He doesn't actually respond.
He doesn't respond. So like, again, this is just her like saying what she thinks. And so it's kind of like, I'm letting you believe what you want to believe. So scars are really, really interesting. Because they, symbolize a lot of things. And traditionally scars in Star Wars represent some sort of creep of evil or villainy, right? So when Anakin has his scars his scar appear during the Clone Wars, he is like, it's an appearance to show like how much he's been through, but also that, he is getting closer to the dark side. In some ways, Kylo's scar actually showed that he was getting closer to the light side because it was like a crack in his mask in a way.
Yes.
His dark facade.
Right.
Oftentimes, of course they show trauma and pain and what we're healed from, survival and resilience. But I also think that in this case, there's something about destiny and fate that might be coming in. Like how Harry Potter's scar works. He was scarred by Voldemort, which means he was the chosen one, which meant he went about to go and face those facts. And so we see the scar just before we have the next scene with Vernestra, which we see a light whip.
Yes.
Which puts us like into the mindset that this could have been caused by that scar.
Right.
Like the scar could have been caused by that.
And if you look at how the scenes are ordered across the entire episode, Vernestra and Chimere's scenes are very frequently back to back. And like she always seems to be considering that there is something coming back to haunt her, from her past. So, I mean, that like, again, we'll see what it ends up being, but certainly they are guiding us in this direction.
He talks about cortosis of the helmet. It's handy against lightsabers, but also as a sensory deprivation headpiece, like what we used to use as younglings. So he's saying he was a youngling.
Well, and it's also the first time he says we, right? Prior to this, it's all I and you. And then this is the first time he says we. So he's starting to consider them a unit.
Just you and the Force and what you bring with you. So
Yoda quote.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is a Yoda line. So if you're in the darkness, you will experience potentially a force vision, or you will be in the force because you have nothing between you and the force. And so that's what the tree on Dagobah is. You're in the force basically in that moment. And so it's going to experience a dreamlike state, and show you what you need to learn from the force.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the Dagobah tree. It's the mirror cave. The helmet is going to be the same thing for her.
Exactly. And so it's going to lead us to the flashbacks, which will reveal the truth. And he's like, try it on. I don't trust you, she says. As I sit in your cave eating your food, I said to myself.
Yeah. Yep.
And he's like, nor should you, but you should learn to trust yourself. Oh my God. And then the helmet just sits there staring at her the whole time.
I love it though.
We're back to Team Vernestra, and we see the death, the carnage in the light of day. And this is to remind us that the deaths were very real, and everything that we've been feeling on the other islands that we are on with Kaimir and Osha also needs to be paralleled with the fact that he did kill these people. You're supposed to feel both of these things at the same time. He is a bad man.
We're not sweeping under the rug the fact that he murdered these people in cold blood. And keep in mind, the way that it was framed in the previous episode is that these are the children of the Jedi. They were Padawans. They were young Jedi, they were cut down in their prime. This is important, right? And so it's the fact that he killed them, that is evidence of his role as the consumer. He is the predator. He consumed them. And so while he is seducing Osha on this island, this evidence of who he also is out there.
Exactly. And we go through kind of the cop drama part of the show.
Yes, that's right. It's like procedural drama.
There's no sign of Osha or Twin. It was definitely one versus many. And Vernestra's like, what do you see? And it's suddenly a cop show.
Yes.
There was a soul survivor aimed at making sure that there would be no other survivors. So a soul person.
And he also says his power extraordinary, his skills erratic. And as he's describing this, Vernestra has this look on her face of recognition and dread. Like she knows who it is that fits this description as she's hearing it spoken aloud.
And Mog is like, Master Soul?
Yeah. Do you think it could be Soul? Yeah, because she says, well, they were all killed by a lightsaber. What does that tell you? And he says, a powerful Jedi has fallen. And of course, he jumps to the assumption of Master Soul, which makes sense because he's just kind of disappeared on them. So they're like, well, what could it have been? But also the thing that happens in this scene is the Umber Moth suddenly attacks from behind. She doesn't look at it, but she senses it there, turns and slices it in two with her light whip, which, though quite badass, is also a problem because just like when Soul killed the Umber Moth, it was a problem because he killed his shadow. He was not confronting it. He was not integrating it. And it's still haunting him all the way up through this episode. And now Vernestra's doing the same thing. She's not facing this shadow. She just killed it.
And this is the biggest indication that this is... that Kaimir is probably connected to Vernestra, is that this symbolism is there. That she just kills the shadow moth.
Well, and not only that, but if you look at his scar, it's a single line that then splits into two lines. There's a divergence in it. And so, on the one hand, she has a weapon that could have made this. And on the other hand, it also visually indicates separation.
Yep. And then she says, so what could it have been? Oh, something to tip the scales.
Right. And was that a quote from earlier in the season? Because I felt like it was, but I couldn't remember where it came from.
She said it earlier. Yeah. There's something I can't see about this. It's all hidden. Something to tip the scales. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And this is the thing, right? Is that the Jedi are sort of just all powerful at this point. And so the question is, is the something to tip the scales, the dark side, the Sith, to sort of draw power away from the Jedi because they've been just completely dominant during this entire period.
Mm-hmm. May awakens, but not like Osha typically awakens.
Right.
Her eyes just sort of blink open and she sees the light above her.
By the way, that's the only place I think that we see actual eclipse imagery, and it's very subtle, but there are these
there is the lines. Yeah,
circles.
You're
there
right.
are these two circles kind of moving apart from one another on an axis of sorts.
Oh, in the light kind of above her, right?
Yeah.
As she opens her eyes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Soul is there. I have no intention of harming you, May. We have a lot to do. We need to save Osha. But first, you and I are going to talk. Mm-hmm. And so May has been living with this absolute need for control. And so, control over her fate, control over her future, control over Osha, and to have her bound and have to listen is the way that she's going to sort of understand the truth about everything.
It's interesting how both girls have completely resisted. They've resisted any possible transformation. They've resisted the truth and at every turn. And so ultimately, they've really had to kind of be forced into it. So Osha in the case of having nowhere else to go, and May in the case of being literally restrained so that she will have to listen.
And this is a lot of people pointed out that this actually parallels TFA Kylo in the interrogation room with Rey, and how he's being very truthful with her, and he approaches her and says, like, we're going to just have a talk and we're going to talk about everything. I do see that as far as like him being this sort of predator that wants to open up to her.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Then we flash to Osha, who has decided to approach the helmet much like the tempting apple in Snow White.
But it also looks like it's like Hamlet looking at the skull of Yorick.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Like there's a little bit of that going on. Like it's this, because think about what it is for her. It's potentially a moment of death and rebirth. The person that she is going to die, and she's going to be reborn as something new. So sitting there and confronting this skull-like helmet is her kind of reaching that point and confronting that death that she's about to experience.
She also sees the vein of cortosis that's behind the helmet as she touches it. So it's like there's something, I don't know, deep and mysterious about this, that it's been taken from the earth to create this thing. But she touches it so gently to start, and then like caresses it, and then takes the helmet and puts it on. And we are in darkness with her. And we hear her breath through the helmet from the outside, and then we kind of experience the darkness with it in the helmet as we fade to dark. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, it's a bit like a marriage. She's accepted his version of what she could be as a potential. And, you have to go into the darkness to find the power and the energy and the knowledge that only lives in the darkness, in your unconscious. And to get there, you have to go to your lowest point. You have to go to the darkest place. But those that attempt to live in the darkness become villains because they never attempt to actually integrate that darkness and make it a part of themselves in balance with everything else. And this is how heroes become lost in the underworld and become villains.
Yeah.
It's really important. And so symbolically, she has broken down emotionally her ego and is open to replacing it with something else.
And I also think they're trading on our knowledge of course, our most famous Darksider, Darth Vader, and his breathing inside his helmet. Like when she first puts it on, she's breathing rather shakily, like she's nervous or afraid. And then when we see her from the outside, her breathing becomes steadier and slower And then by the time we get to the inside, she's much more relaxed. And you can definitely, even though it doesn't sound exactly like Vader, I do think that we are intended to be reminded of that. And we know Vader was trapped in a death-like state for a very long time. And she just put on this helmet that looks like a skull. And so she has entered now a death-like state. And the question is whether she will eventually get out of it again.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is a catabasis moment. She's at her lowest point. And all of the pieces.
But to her, she thinks she's taking charge. She thinks she's taking her power.
But all of the pieces of who she thought she was are going to be on display in this next episode. And that's how she's going to hopefully reform into a whole person. We'll see.
Right. Well, one way or another, she's going to regain these memories and, understand what really happened. She and May both will. And it's important, actually, that Soul did not tell her, because while that probably would have been healthier for their relationship, it would not have allowed her to truly explore these darkest parts of herself, which she absolutely has to do. She has to.
I think she was probably darker than we were led to believe with her very, unreliable narrator version in episode 3.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I'm really, really excited for next week.
I can't wait for next week. Cannot wait for next week. And here's where I kind of want to wrap this up with regard to her arc that we have thus far seen. I believe that by the end of this episode, she has undergone a corruption arc from damsel to bully. I think she is out. I think she's out of her maiden phase entirely because she's broken away from mentors. I mean, honestly, even though Chimere claims he wants to be the master, that's not the way that he's presented himself in this entire episode. It really isn't. He taught her a little, but generally speaking, this has all been about pushing her to discover things on her own and pushing her to realize her power and accept it. And so I think that she has moved into the hero phase, but it's an aggressive hero phase, and she's going to be a bully.
Interesting. I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah.
Do we still feel like Chimere is a sorceress?
I'm not sure. I think his whole shtick is that he's chimeric, right? He changes. We've talked about that since his first introduction. He shifts so easily between these different personas. Even the fact that we saw, him being so caring throughout this entire episode, while, in the last episode, we saw him slaughter people and hold May by the neck and everything. He's a bad man who also can be very caring. And so, I don't know if he's one archetype. I think it's it just depends on whose perspective you're looking through and what he's doing at the moment. I think he shifts between archetypes
because he comes off as the lover in this episode.
He does. He does.
Which is a flat archetype. It doesn't change. It's usually used in romantic stories. Pride and Prejudice, very known for flat archetypes.
Yep. Yeah. And for anyone, because I've seen a few people asking about Chimere Redemption. Again, I think we've talked about this before. Not going to rule it out, of course, but not this season. I don't see it happening this season. I think what everyone needs to understand is this is not I can save him. This is definitely I can make him worse. Yeah. I mean, I just want the season 2. They've been talking about how much they have planned out. And I would just say be very loud on the internet because nothing is a guarantee with Disney. So yeah, for real. Seriously.
As the Willow Wounded will tell you.
Yes. Oh my goodness. But yeah, please just yell about how much you love the show. Keep making those hilarious memes. Let's get those AO3 numbers up. Those are rookie numbers. And well, I'm looking forward to it. Next week's going to be really good.
Yeah, no, this show has been a gem. I appreciate Leslie Handlin so much and the entire crew and production. I want to thank you all for that, for everything you've done. It's been just so good so far. And as I get to go to Batuu, I get to go to Galaxy's Edge and experience Star Wars land with my family for the first time with them. While a show like The Acolyte is going on, it just gives me a lot of joy to be deep into Star Wars and loving it a lot.
Oh, so happy for you.
Do you need me to overnight you a purple cloak for Batuu?
Yes. I should have brought one. I should have. Well, Missy, where can people find you if they're looking for you online?
You can find me on Tumblr, where I am All Girls Are Princesses.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and cheers.
Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music by Christy Carew for What the Force. You can support the show directly on Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We'd like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love What the Force: Sophie H., Derek C., Minky Moo, Sarah Joy, John, In Wild Space, How Rude, Anna Perez, Neil, Christian Luca, Carly Ann, Scott C., and Susan. Support the show by wearing the Force with our merch. Like and subscribe on YouTube or leave a 5-star review on iTunes or other pod apps. It helps people find the show. You can connect with us on Twitter at WT Force Show, What the Force Podcast on Facebook, our website, whattheforce.ca, or our Discord. Links are in the liner notes. Reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.